What's up, my nerd?
Welcome, everyone, to the Credible Nerds podcast. Once again, we are back to talk more Mistborn by Brandon Sanderson. We are going to be talking about Mistborn Book 3 in this first era, and it is called The Hero of Ages. So we will be talking spoilers. It's been out for a few years, so hopefully you read it by now. If not, sorry, I don't know what to tell you. Maybe go back and read it.
Go read it.
It's worth it. So we're here to do that one today. We've done the previous books, The Final Empire and Well of Ascension. So look for those podcasts in our catalog library. It's been going on for the past couple months now. So check that out. Also, as always, like and subscribe to our channel. If you are interested in Mistborn, kind of the Cosmere with Brandon Sanderson, we do plan on continuing and talking more and more. We've done Elantris, the Mistborn series, and we'll just keep plugging through the Cosmere until we get them all done at some point. So like and subscribe to the channel. Let us know what you think. As you listen to the episode, watch the episode, comment, hey, I think you guys got it right there, or I know a little bit more about this topic, so make a comment. Or if you think we're just up in the night making stuff up, let us know there too, because we like to be as accurate as possible, because we are the Credible Nerds and we want to be credible. So thanks for listening. Thanks for watching. We really appreciate you guys. Once again, I have my fellow Mistborn with me, Kyle. How's it going?
Good. How's it going, everybody?
And we are back to break in and dive into this third book, Hero of Ages. So just kind of a quick overview of this story to kind of give us a summary, kind of set the tone from the last book. This is straight off of Wikipedia, so nothing too crazy. But as the world begins to succumb to ruin's influence, earthquakes shake the land in ever greater frequencies. The ash falls from the sky constantly, and inquisitors and Koloss, no longer controlled by the Lord Ruler, rampage across the world. The mists are appearing in daylight now, and even worse, killing those foolish enough to venture out into it. Elend holds a tenuous grip as emperor, and as he and Vin search for the storage caches of an Atium stash, the Lord Ruler hid in the event Ruin was freed. So that sets the tone for the start of this book. For you, Kyle, any thoughts on, if you remember back in the day when you first started reading it, like, did you have any expectations, and knowing kind of the mists and how they work? What were your initial thoughts, if you can remember, or recent thoughts?
So I remember when I read it the first time, I had just finished book 2, and obviously, like we talked about in book 1, Kelsier dies, right?
Yeah.
And so I was really hoping somewhere in book 3 that he would like make an appearance, or somehow it would be a gotcha kind of a moment. That no, he's not dead.
Yeah.
But obviously we know he actually is dead, and does appear later on in the Cosmere, and as we read in some of the Arcanum Unbounded stuff, he plays a pivotal role in a lot of the things that happen, even temporarily holding a shard, which is kind of cool.
Yeah, surprising.
And so, but yeah, when I remember reading through it, I was hoping that Kelsier would make an appearance, and I was sadly disappointed inside of the book.
Yeah.
But I was happy when I read the Arcanum Unbounded. I'm like, oh, okay, all right.
Yeah.
He did have a major role in all this. So.
Yeah. Yep. Cool. Yeah. I was excited for the series. I knew it was the end book of the trilogy, so I expected, this grand final battle, and I think we got that. I was expecting the good guys to win, which we kind of got, and we'll get into a little bit later on, but things don't go the way that at least I had hoped initially for our main characters, our heroes. And at first I didn't know how to feel about that, but we will talk more about it. We got more insight into Ruin and preservation of the gods of this world. And so that was cool. I really enjoyed that. Even this reread that I recently did, probably at least the third time for my rereads. And as you do each reread and as the Cosmere expands, it kind of, you gain more light and knowledge. Gain more knowledge as you kind of do those rereads. So it was good. It's still good, years later. One of the main characters in this series, actually in the beginning, he's kind of this secondary character. He's there, and he's giving advice to our heroes. He's part of the crew. But he's kind of this Yoda type character. We're talking about Sazed here. But as the trilogy goes on, and especially in this one, he really steps up.
He does.
Even though he was shook to the core last book when his friend, who he really reconnected with, Twindale, and they started I don't know do you think they kind of rekindled their romance, or?
I think so, particularly at a intellectual level.
Yes,
right.
Yes.
And so I think they really hit it off and were able to connect in a way that has, because if we remember, Tyndwyl was part of the breeding program under the Lord Ruler, and so while physical attraction is definitely important, I think what was more important for Sazed and Tyndwyl, particularly given that Sazed was a eunuch and Tyndwyl had been part of the breeding program, was that intellectual connection. Yeah. And I think that meant a lot more than any physical connection would have. Yeah. And so consequently, to your point, I think Sazed was really broken up after her death at the Siege of Luthadel.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, it was definitely. And for me, I kind of didn't realize, as I was reading it, it made sense, but then she dies and he's heartbroken. And it's like, wow, they really did connect. Because you're used to the physical and, they fall in love and there's all that stuff going on. But it wasn't the case with them necessarily. Yeah. But his story continues, his story arc, and he really has probably, I don't know if he's the most changed character, but he's definitely top 3 with him. It's basically him, Vin, and Elendil's story. Yeah. It was Spook kind of there as well, but not quite as prevalent in my opinion. So he ends up going from a secondary part of the crew, secondary character part of the crew, to being one of the main protagonists in this third book. So you have some thoughts on Sazed and his role in this book, his character arc. What are you thinking?
No, it's interesting, and we'll get to this in a little bit here. But Sazed in the Mistborn world as a whole becomes a very pivotal character. Yeah. Right. Particularly at the end of this book, and we'll talk about that here in just a second. But he, like Justin mentioned, he has been a keeper for years and years and years and years, right? And his primary, and like we talked about in the past, keepers are responsible for, maintaining all the knowledge that was lost during the years of the Lord Ruler, and their role was to be able to teach the people about that knowledge when it was safe to do so again. Mm-hmm. And so after the Siege of Luthadel, after the Lord Ruler has fallen, or excuse me, after the Lord Ruler's fallen, he takes part in a lot of that, right? Mm-hmm. And then comes back to Luthadel, and the Siege of Luthadel happens. There's quite frankly multiple post-apocalyptic things happening. Yeah. He loses his love interest. Big things are happening, and consequently, I think he starts to feel a little bit of a loss of purpose. Mm-hmm. Right? Yep. And he starts to question, well, what use? If we remember his particular piece of knowledge that he shared and wanted or gathered and shared was religion. All right? So he kept track of all the religions in the world and wanted to share that with the world after the Lord Ruler was gone. But after Tyndwyl dies, all these post-apocalyptic things happen. Ruin's influence begins to increase. The world seems like it's ending. He's kind of like, well, what's the point at this point? So he kind of has a faith crisis. Yeah. And he begins the systematic review of all his religions and, in an attempt to just disprove them all. Yeah. And unfortunately, kind of becomes a very bitter person in the beginning of this book. And he transitions away from being that Yoda person or the person that people would go to for advice, and unfortunately becomes a bit selfish in how he approaches things. And so you can kind of see that he wants to believe something, right? And I kind of like to compare it to a lot of the times when people in real life have belief or faith crises, it's usually after something traumatic happens.
Yeah, a lot of times, yeah.
You know, whether it's a death of a loved one, like Sazed experienced, or through some significant medical event, or maybe losing out on something, whatever it may be. It kind of makes people stop and think, well, what am I actually doing here? Like, what's the point? And so you think about how Sazed kind of works through this. It's very similar to how a lot of people that I know have worked through similar problems, right? They start searching for answers, right? And they start grasping at all these different straws, right? And so Sazed starts going through all of his religions, and he's like,
there was a bunch of them.
And there was a ton of them,
Yeah.
right? There's tons of them.
Yeah.
And some were, I think there's quotes in there where he goes through and he says, well, some of these are absolutely, it doesn't say moronic, but basically moronic. Like why would anybody believe this, right? Yeah. And so he disproves each one of them. You can kind of see this intellectual versus emotional battle that he starts going through.
Yeah.
And I think it's similar to an internal battle that a lot of normal humans have on Earth, like intellect versus emotional. And there are things you want to believe that intellect may or may not sync with, right? And so this whole concept of faith comes in. And so anyways, long and the short of it is, Sazed goes through this journey of questioning his faith, questioning all the things he's believed in, and really not necessarily what religion to believe in, but his purpose in actually documenting and retaining religions, because he wants to make a difference, and he wants to have a purpose, and he's called into question why he's kind of gone through all this. And so in the end, a lot of the time, I think when people go through things like this, they kind of end up in one of two buckets. They either become very bitter and selfish people, and so not intra looking, but only looking for oneself, right? Or they become they find a higher purpose for themselves, right? And Sazed definitely kind of falls into the second one, where he, after going through all these religions, he finally comes to the conclusion that it doesn't really matter which ones are true versus not. What matters is what people believe, and that there's a sense of balance, right? And that actually sets him up really well for events that happen later on. And I know you're going to talk about that here in just a sec, but I think this faith journey that he goes on prepares him to be able to handle the often polar opposite situations he's going to find himself in later on. And so it's kind of I know Brandon Sanderson, when he writes, he does all these things for a purpose, right? And I really liked how you kind of had this intellectual struggle interlaced with all these, belief systems and other things like that. Whereas you look at kind of the character arcs of like Elend and Vin and some of these other folks, they're all very different. They are intellectual, but belief really never comes into that realm. Yeah. And so I liked how he, like you mentioned, the character arc for Sazed has been kind of stale until this book. And I think he took it in a very good direction to be able to set him up to not only overcome this challenge himself, but also have him be in a place when he takes up this mantle to help other people overcome something similar.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting because he did have this faith crisis that you so explained very well. And part of it was like, is there a God?
Yeah.
And which is ironic, knowing how the story ends up.
Right.
Well, there is a God, and it's you.
Then it's you, buddy.
Yeah. And so it ends, there's a cap on it that's really good. Very satisfying. But I didn't really, it wasn't that I didn't like Sazed.
Right.
First two books, but I was like, he's another guy. But I really grew to like him in this third book because I think he learned a lot, grew a lot, and what he did mattered. in this book,
Right.
a lot. So that also helped. His story was important. Yeah, so I think he ended up having quite the journey, and I don't think that you mentioned Kelsier earlier that he died, and I think that couldn't have happened with Sazed if Kelsier was still around.
Yep.
Because he would have still been influencing Sazed and his role, and Kelsier didn't believe in a god either necessarily. No. So, plus there just wasn't enough screen time, I guess, for someone like Sazed to step up. So we regret losing Kelsier so soon, but allowed it in the second book. It allowed for Elend to kind of step up and kind of take over and be the leader. So we got his character arc last book, pretty well fleshed out, and then this one was Sazed. So it's interesting. It's Kelsier, more like Vin. Kelsier was holding everybody back, right?
Yeah,
holding Vin back, holding Elend back, and then holding Sazed back. But then, like you said, we get to see and revisit Kelsier more later on.
Right.
So it's a win-win. Win-win-win.
It is.
So, but I want to talk a little bit about ruin and preservation, because we really get into it with this book. That was another plot line that we were exposed to here and there in the previous two books, but this one, it came full front in the sense that you have our heroes talking with preservation and ruin, or at least or is that the secret history of Mistborn? I'm getting those two mixed up, but they're directly involved in the story.
Yes.
And one key thing that I really found interesting was how Ruin was trying to trick everyone by rewriting the story,
right? The
prophecy, and he tricked everybody with that in book 2 and in this one. So I think they played a bigger role. We see preservation die at the end of this book.
Right.
His physical body dies, and they explained how that happened. It was set up from the beginning in the initial pact between him and Ruin to when they created Scadrial. He kind of snuck in a little bit and gave the people of Scadrial part of his essence naturally. And so that set him back and kind of set him on the path to ultimately dying at some point and allowing Ruin to step up and take control. And we find that also that Ruin, we always saw Ruin as the bad god, right? Like, he's evil and he's out to get everybody. And it's really just nature.
Yeah.
Like, you can't have something, preservation preserves, and you can't have something stay in a preserved state forever.
Right.
Otherwise, there's no change. And ruin is change, basically, for better or worse. Ultimately, a lot of people view it as worse because people die under ruin. That's part of the change process as they get older and eventually die. So we view him as a bad influence or a bad persona, I guess. But ultimately, it's just part of the process, circle of life, right?
Right.
So it was interesting to kind of learn that in this book and kind of get more about them and how they've been battling out since the beginning, since they created Scadrial. And I find that interesting. Like, they're like, oh yeah, let's create this world, and then they never work together again. Right. They're always working against each other.
Right.
So I guess that's just story, but. And I also came to realize that they're the only, from what we know so far, they're the only two shards gods that actually are opposites.
Right.
Kind of black and white, yin and yang type thing. And so one can't fulfill his purpose without the other.
Right.
But yet they're always battling for that purpose. So it's great in the sense that, because you got a lot of stories that are like have this element, like Star Wars, light side, dark side with the Force,
right.
And Wheel of Time has this type of thing with Saidin, Saidar.
Yep. And
so if done well, that concept is really intriguing and interesting to read and be a part of a story. As far as your thoughts for ruin and preservation, I think we'll get into their ultimate demise or fulfilling their purpose here in a minute. But What's your take on Ruin? Did you think it was well done, or do you feel like it was kind of another trope, or what?
No, I do think it was well done, because I mean, you think of the rest of Brandon Sanderson's Cosmere. To your point, there's a lot of other gods, but none of them are opposites. Not necessarily opposed, but just opposites of one another, right? Mm-hmm. And I think it's done well in the sense that I know it's kind of a trope nowadays to make the bad guys in movies not just be bad guys, right? They're bad guys with a tragic backstory kind of a thing, right? But I think in this sense, it's, even though we kind of attribute Ruin to being an evil influence, to understand that he's not like you put, not necessarily evil. He's just opposite of preservation, and one without the other. Given how Scadrial was created, can't function, right? It just, like, everything stays exactly the same with preservation, and then everything would die and go away with Ruin. And so in the way that Scadrial was created, and in my opinion, of all the worlds in the Cosmere, Scadrial is the most like, I think, the world we live in now. Yeah. Right? In that things grow and develop and die and go away. Mm-hmm. Right? And so I feel like the way that Brandon had portrayed that through Ruin and preservation makes a lot of sense, and is very, very like what we go through every day.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, a lot of similarities there. I think with Ruin, I think I heard somewhere that Ruin is the shard, the name of the shard that broke when Adonalsium split. Yeah. It's Ruin and preservation are the names of those shards, but AT is the vessel or the guy that took possession of Ruin. Mm-hmm. So that's where we get Atium from, right?
Right.
But that AT was a good guy. He had good intentions and all that sort of thing. And so Ruin would actually been more ruinish or more evil if AT had been like a bad guy.
Right.
So his temperament, his personality, his desires, I guess, tempered that a little bit.
Right.
To be able to kind of not be so destructive. But ultimately it became part of him, and he was ruining things.
Right.
He couldn't resist the nature of it all, but I read that it could have been a lot worse if it would have been someone else.
True.
Maybe like a Kelsier if he would have picked that up.
Yeah. Yep.
So, and then preservation, kind of the same thing. He was good intentions. I haven't read much about kind of who they were before they picked up the shards. I know there's a little bit out there, but I haven't looked into it. So we'll have to see. Probably not too much about them. But so it's interesting. They worked together. They fought against each other. They ultimately died together.
Yeah.
So that was kind of their thing. And it's kind of like the Lord Ruler, right? Everybody viewed him as a bad guy, but ultimately he was keeping things in check.
Yep.
And so he was misunderstood, and he had this other agenda that nobody knew about. So it's kind of like with Ruin. He's not as bad as we thought he was.
Right. No, exactly.
So, but yeah, it all comes to a head in this book, the final battle. And on a scale of 1 to 10, I think, in my opinion, Robert Jordan's / Brandon Sanderson's final battle in the Wheel of Time series is like the pinnacle of last battles.
Yes.
10 out of 10. How would you rank this final battle on that scale?
I'd give it a solid 7. 7. It was good. It wasn't nearly to the scale as some of these other battles that you see at like the end of The Lord of the Rings or The Wheel of Time, right? Mm-hmm. But it was, very similar to a lot of these other ones. The battle for, the end of the world.
Yeah.
Right? Mm-hmm. Save the world, and if you don't, then the consequence is the end.
Yeah.
Right? Mm-hmm. And so I think it was perhaps not as grandiose as the other two, but still good.
Yeah, I would agree 7 around there, because it was a battle for the end of the world. It didn't seem as grandiose or epic,
right,
as some of these other ones. So it did seem kind of scaled down in least in the viewpoints and the parts, the pieces that we got from the story.
Right. Not to say that it wasn't high stakes,
Right.
for sure.
Yeah, the stakes were there.
Stakes were definitely there, but it kind of felt like it was a slow burn to get to this point, so it kind of just felt normal by the time we got there.
Yeah.
Right?
That's a good point.
The world has been ending for
The whole book.
Right? And so by the time you get there, like, it's like, oh, the world's ending. Like, oh, what else is new?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And so...
Okay. Yeah, but our heroes played a big part in there in the end with Vin and Elend and Sazed.
That's very true. And just to kind of set the stage there, it's like I mentioned, like through the whole book, we've worked up to the world-ending events, right? The ash is falling a lot from the sky, right? There's people dying of mist sickness, and we've got all sorts of other things happening there. Elend and Vin and his company are looking for those storage caches. They found a couple of them. There's cities that are rebelling up in Orto, right? That Spook's supposed to take care of, and eventually does, but a lot of pain and suffering there. And then you have Fadric City with the rebelling king who happens to be a misting, right? An Atium misting. Yeah. Which is kind of cool, and nobody knew existed.
Yeah.
Right? But so consequently, bad things are happening everywhere. And Ellen's army, along with Vin, happens to be camped outside of Fadric City with his Koloss army, right? And then Ruin takes control of the Koloss army, and Elend has to, Elend and the what's the name? King Yeoman, that's what it is. Yeoman have to become allies all of a sudden to come, defend against the invading Koloss, because Ruin at this point is pulling out all the stops.
Yeah, he's done. He's
right?
ready.
It is time to end the world, right? And so consequently, all heck is breaking loose. The Koloss begin attacking, and Vin at this point is ultra powerful, right? Very powerful Mistborn, is no longer learning and kind of trying to grow and things like that. She's ready to kind of fulfill her purpose. And so suddenly, I can't remember what brought her to Luthadel. I can't remember why did she go to Luthadel? Was it because the Inquisitors were there?
Yeah, I can't remember.
I think something was happening at Luthadel. We're gonna get crucified in the comments for this.
Well,
we're gonna. Anyways,
we can pause it.
Vin has to go back to Luthadel for a very important reason.
Very important.
Very important. And you guys can chew us out in the comments for this and say, "Dang it, you have a Mistborn podcast and you don't know why Vin went back to Luthadel." But suffice it to say, she's going there.
Yeah.
And some crazy things happen while she's there. Right? She goes back to the capital and runs into all of the Inquisitors.
Yeah.
And
ambush her, right?
Yep, exactly. And it's a big deal. Like, these Inquisitors are very powerful. Perhaps one of the pinnacles of the Lord Ruler's hemalurgic creations, right? And among those Inquisitors is Marsh. And Marsh has always been an interesting character throughout the series, in that he starts off as Kelsier's brother in their party and their band and trying to overthrow the Lord Ruler, transitions over to be on the in the Inquisition, right? To kill the Inquisitors, and then becomes an Inquisitor, right? And then at this point, and throughout book 2 and book 3, the interesting thing is because he's been pierced by so many spikes, it feels like he has no control, because Ruin can take direct control over him and control everything that he does. And
I think it's more than 4, I think is right.
Yeah. It's like, well, so like later in like the second one, I think it's 2, right? 1, and that's why some of the Khandra go crazy, right? If they take out one of their spikes, then Harmony, Sazed, right, can't take direct control.
Yeah.
And then, Wax pierces, I can't remember what her name was, but pierces her with another one, and then Harmony can exert direct control over this conjurer. Lessie, that's who it is, right. And so I can't remember. I think maybe mental control might be 2, and then physical control might be more, like 4 or something like that.
Yeah.
But throughout all this, it's interesting because you can see while Ruin may have almost total control over Marsh's soul, I guess you could say, is still his own.
Yeah, he's still thinking like, I gotta stop this.
Exactly.
He just can't.
But he can't, right? And so in the back of his mind, he has decided that while he can't resist, he can make Ruin completely trust him, right? And hold off his defiance for a moment that matters. And so that kind of all comes to a head in this battle over the capital, over Creedic Shaw, right? Vin is battling all these Inquisitors, and it's super epic. And things are happening. She kills some Inquisitors, and at the end, it's down to Marsh and Vin, right? And Marsh is a very powerful Inquisitor.
Yeah, he's going to kill her.
He's going to kill her. He's got her pinned down, and this looks like the end. And it's right then when Marsh decides to resist and ends up pulling the spike or the earring out of Vin's ear, which allows her, obviously, to absorb all the mists and, heal herself because she's been very battered and bruised by this battle. And ultimately, this whole thing destroys Creedic Shaw, right? Almost, I think, practically levels Luthadel. And ultimately, she ascends to become Preservation, right? And I really liked that take because a lot of the times, people feel like they have absolutely no control over the situation that they're in. And it kind of goes to show you, even in situations where you feel like you have no control, you can still, your choices still make a critical difference. And so, and I think Marsh's sacrifice or his resistance illustrates that, because without that, story's over, world ends.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Vin dies, Ruin basically destroys the world, right? And Sazed never ascends. And so because Marsh decided to make a small choice that seemed relatively, he just took an earring out, right?
Yeah.
Changed the whole story.
It's a small thing.
Exactly. And so anyways, that's as we know, Vin ascends, takes on ascends, finds Ellen gets killed, right? And then she doesn't really have anything to live for anymore, and she goes at Ruin and doesn't hold anything back. Freaks Ruin out and's like, "You're going to kill us both." And she's like, "That's the idea."
Yep.
And takes them both out.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah, I think a couple of thoughts as you were talking. It's always been the earring, right?
Yeah, it's always been the earring.
It was there in the first book. Did you pick up on it before the third book? I didn't.
I remember I didn't pick up on it. But when I read it, it was kind of like right?
Yeah.
Because in the first book, she's able to draw on the mists, right? But she didn't have her earring in when she did.
Yep. And we didn't realize that's what it was.
Exactly.
And I think it happens in the second book too.
Yep.
So it's been there the whole time. I think as they were talking about, because I think Sazed and Spook were talking, or Spook and someone over in Urto, and that's where it's kind of revealed that the earring or something, that you have to remove all your spikes, right? So I think at that point, I was like, oh, yeah. So I kind of got it, and then I didn't really get it till Marsh pulled out the earring in that last part. So that was great.
That was
great storytelling.
Great way to kind of tie it all together.
Yeah.
So
there's that, and then I think Vin went to Krennic Shaw to look for the ATM.
That's right. That's right.
And they didn't know it was in the mines yet.
Ah, yeah, that's
so
right.
what did you think about the whole ATM thing? Like, it's the body of a god. So Ruin's looking for it so he can claim his body again and become all powerful.
Yep.
But it's really hidden in the Khandra, the basement of the Khandra complex or whatever. Did that make sense to you? Did that fit?
Honestly, I kind of struggled with that because you have AT, right, who exists, right, and then when Ruin dies, you see AT, he like falls off, right, like he's dead. Same thing with Preservation, right? So I didn't really get the whole ATM as the body of the god thing. I thought it was kind of cool when, like, at the end, they're like shoveling ATM in their mouths, saying,
their stomachs full of metal.
Right, exactly. That was kind of fun, but I didn't really get that.
I still don't understand that. Like, I get the concept, what they're saying, but I don't see how that works. Like, and there's a lot of it.
Right.
There's a ton of that metal. And they've been using it for years, like hundreds of years.
Right.
So, and it keeps refreshing through the mines. It keeps dripping and forming in those crystals. And so it's like, where is it coming from?
The only thing I can think of is that when Ruin and Preservation created the world, like they invested pieces of themselves into, maybe not their entire selves, right? Because we see that Preservation put more of himself in the world, which set himself up to die once Ruin was released, right? But the only thing I can think of is that by investing themselves into the world, pieces of their body became fused with it, and so you have what's the opposite of ATM? Lerasium, right? So you have those Lerasium beads that turn, ordinary people into Mistborn, right? And then obviously the ATM is the future-looking one, and so maybe that's just part of them, I guess.
Yeah, kind of left over from the creation of Scadrial. Yeah, I can see that. I think that's interesting. Hopefully, maybe there's something out there we haven't seen yet that explains that part of it.
Yeah.
But so, and then because, and we've all but said it, so I'll say it. But Ruin and Preservation, their bodies are destroyed, and they kind of, their essence is, the shard is released, the power, and so Sazed is there. And he steps in and takes both. And he becomes a new god called Harmony. So we get more about Harmony in the next era of Mistborn. We really get to know him more. But he does some things that he reforms the world. So the ash mounts, the volcanoes aren't spewing ash, and kind of puts everything right again so plants grow.
Right.
And all the people who had gone to the caches underground and are living there during that whole reformation. And so the ending is Vin and Elend are dead. They had a chance to come back, but they declined. And so that's, at the beginning I said it doesn't turn out the way I wanted it to.
Yeah.
And I don't know, I still think, but I'm torn because they do all this work, Vin and Elend, they die, they sacrifice themselves. And to bring them back would kind of cheapen that maybe a little bit.
Maybe.
Or I don't know, but I still wanted it to happen.
I did too. I really wanted them to like lead the world into a new age, right? Because they complement each other so well.
And they finally learn how to work together and
they
love
do.
each other and all that stuff. And then they die.
Yeah.
So,
right. They finally figure it out and then they're gone.
Yeah.
And so.
Yeah. So I was a little torn on that. And Brandon did it in another book, one of the Secret Project books with Yumi and the Nightmare Painter.
Yeah.
Where I won't spoil that, I guess, but similar thing happens, and I'm like, oh, okay. And I actually didn't like it there.
Yeah.
I didn't like how that turned out, so I don't know what I'm thinking. Anyways, so with there's a new dawn. Spook is a Mistborn.
Yep.
Sazed makes him a Mistborn, and then they kind of live. They recreate the human race or the Scadrial race, or whatever it is. So I thought the ending was good. Still torn about Vin and Elend, but everything else I liked.
Oh yeah, I thought. I mean, like I said, I feel like it wasn't quite the epic of as an ending as I've read in other fantasy series.
Yeah,
but it was still good. I felt satisfied after I read it. I thought most of the ends were tied right, and a lot more got tied when you read some of the other books like
the Secret History
and like Arcanum Unbounded and stuff like that. And so, no, I thought it was wrapped up pretty well.
Yeah, cool. Well, so we mentioned a little bit earlier about the spikes.
Yes,
and that is another magical art of Scadrial. There's 3. In this one, there's the Allomancy, Feruchemy, and this new one we're going to talk about, Hemalurgy. Allomancy is of preservation. That's his thing. Feruchemy is a mixture of both, or at least both ruin and preservation can use them, use that magic system. And then Hemalurgy is ruin's take on the magic system using the investiture. So we haven't really talked in depth about it, but it's basically involves spikes. You take metal, and we find out as the story goes on that the type of metal you use also plays into the type of ability you gain by using Hemalurgy.
right.
But basically, in this series, it's pretty graphic, pretty brutal how they spike each other. Basically, they have the person, we saw it with Marsh, how he was turned into an Inquisitor. They lay the person they want on the table to gain this magic power, because it's not a natural power.
No.
Like with Allomancy, you can have it, and then a lot of people are snapped. They're exposed to the mists, which is of preservation, and as a result, they gain allomantic power, or become a Mistborn with all of the powers. So there's a born element. Same with Hemalurgy, or not Hemalurgy, Feruchemy. There's a kind of the thing you're born with, like you have brown hair, you're tall, you're short, you have Feruchemy.
Right.
So it's kind of that thing. But with Hemalurgy, it's not that at all. You have to be given it. And how you get it is, in this trilogy, someone lays on the table who wants it. They put someone else on top of them who has
a desired power or something, right?
Yeah. Like they're a feruchemist or allomancy. They have some type of that. And they drive a spike through the person into the heart of the person who wants the power. And so it's very bloody. The person dies. The person on top dies. The person underneath survives, and they gain this power. And the reason they did it that way is because if you can stab someone and kill them and take that and infuse that metal spike with the power that you're wanting, and then take it and then go to someone else and then pound it in their heart or whatever. But if you do it that way, it kind of loses its strength.
Right.
Within I think it's the first day.
Right.
It loses a lot of its strength. So you want to do it as immediately as possible, no exposure to air.
Right.
So that's where they're like laying people on top of the other person and killing them. This is pretty crazy. I was surprised to read that in this series.
I was too. Like,
Yeah.
But I remember when I read that the first time, I'm like, yeah, who's the author of this book?
Is this human sacrifice? It basically was.
Brandon Sanderson's written this?
Yeah.
So that's pretty. And it's not like just one spike. It's like lots of spikes.
Yeah, there's like 2 in the eyes, 1 in the chest, 1 in the back.
Several in the arms. Right?
Yeah. So it's pretty brutal. But that's how normal people, I guess, gain these allomantic powers or feruchemic powers, is through this murder of other people. And they later perfect it, I guess you could say, in this next trilogy, where they use thinner spikes and they have a way to if you transport it in blood, and it's less likely to lose power and stuff.
Right.
So they become more refined in the next era with their spikes. Because in this book, they're like, I always pictured them as like railroad spikes, these huge,
especially with the Inquisitors.
Yeah, huge old chunk of metal. And then in the next series, it's more like needles.
Right.
So
right.
Again, they got a little more refined there. But I was also reading into it that when the person who gets spiked dies, but then the person who gets the spike, it creates cracks in their soul.
Yeah.
And that's is kind of how it allows ruin to come in and grant them the power.
Oh, interesting.
And then with allomancy, when they're snapped, the mist kind of does the same thing. It creates these like, I viewed them as like hairline cracks
Right.
in their soul. And then that's how preservation is able to give them the power through the mists.
Interesting.
So it damages the person who's getting the power to some degree.
Right.
And when they die, it delays their transference to the beyond.
Right.
When they move to the next stage, their spirit. And so, I don't know, it has long-lasting effects. Now, I'm wondering, so they go to the great beyond and they're chilling there, we're doing whatever they do there. Are they damaged there? Do they have the power that they got invested with in Scadrial and these other worlds? Do they still have it? Or is it because they're dead, they don't? But I think if it cracks your spirit and it kind of binds to your spirit, I think when you go to the spiritual realm in the Cosmere, you still have that power, I would assume.
I would think so. Originally, before I heard you say that, I probably would have said no. I probably would have said it's a physical thing, right? And so therefore, like when they die, their soul goes to the great beyond as a normal soul. Mm-hmm. But hearing you say that it it cracks their spirit or cracks their soul or like fuses itself to their soul in some way, then I would probably say yeah. Mm-hmm. And is kind of part of who they are in wherever they go. And I don't know if Brandon's ever said he's going to write about the great beyond what's already been written, right? Mm-hmm. But it would be interesting to see if there's anybody that comes back, right? And is, for all intents and purposes, resurrected into whatever they were. Mm-hmm. Do they still have their powers? Is it different? And so I think it would be interesting if, not necessarily if Brandon wrote about what happens after you die and go to the great beyond, but more what would happen if somebody came back, How would that person be?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I've wondered that too, because there's been several, well, not several, but a couple hints, like when Wayne dies, he meets with Sazed and they talk for a bit.
Right.
When Kelsier almost dies, they talk for a bit.
Right.
So there's these moments where they're going into the great beyond or not. And same with Vin.
Right.
So I think they're hinting at, there's obviously an existence after on a spiritual level. But I think there's going to be a comeback, like the Avengers type thing where like, hey, this is the end of the world, end of the Cosmere. We need everybody.
Right.
And so it's kind of like they come through these holes and they'll step through like, yeah, we're back.
Right.
Something like that.
I feel like that a lot of books are alluding to that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And so.
Yeah, I think that'd be cool.
That would be way cool.
Yeah. So we'll see.
Come on, Brandon.
What's one of our predictions? Heard it here first.
Exactly.
On October 17th, 2024. Okay, so that's hemalurgy. And they are starting to refine it. And in this next era of Mistborn, they're also adding more powers. You're not just hemalurgic, you're feruchemic and hemalurgic. And, they're kind of combining them all into one thing. So I think the next trilogy or the next era of Mistborn Era 3, you're going to see this perfect combination of the three. And it's going to be pretty powerful.
I think so. I think that's going to be really interesting.
Yeah.
And you see kind of the initial grasps at that here, like how, these hemalurgic creations like the Koloss and the Khandra and, the Inquisitors being like the most, I wouldn't say the most brutal, but perhaps the most refined and brutal at the same time.
Yeah.
And how they in the second series refine it to where it's blends of the two, where it was more mutually exclusive in the first one. I think this next series, there's going to be, to your point, a combination of all three where it's very balanced.
Mm-hmm. And then you throw in the mix with the Aeon Door.
Yeah. Yep.
And we saw a little bit of that in the last book, Lost Metal. And then you can throw in some fabrials from the Roshar system.
Exactly.
I mean, where it's headed, you can just only imagine what's going to happen.
And that's the interesting thing about hemalurgy, right? Is that theoretically, like, hemalurgists could steal power from anywhere, right? And I know Brandon's alluded to, the further away they get from their home system, the less powerful that individual becomes. I believe that's what he said, right?
Yeah, but I think I read, keep talking that, but I think hemalurgy is an exception.
Right.
Okay.
Right. And so, I'd be curious when and if this, battle for the Cosmere happens, if hemalurgy plays an important role in essentially creating more or less super soldiers to battle, or perhaps the opposite, right? Creates these, doom bringers of some sort to that people have to either destroy or use to destroy the ultimate baddie, I guess.
Yeah. Yeah. The Thanos
of the Cosmere.
I think that's going to be Dragonsteel, or one of the dragons. I think
So.
Someone we haven't met yet, for sure. So we'll see. All right. So that's our thoughts on hemalurgy. We'll talk more about it as we go through the Mistborn books, but that's kind of the basics of it. All right. So as we always like to do, throw in a top 5. Kyle, you got the top 5 this time. What's your top 5?
I do. So I given this is the end of this series, I figured we could do the top 5 most iconic moments in the series.
Of the 3 books?
In the 3 books, yep. And so start with number 5. I think, and all right, I'm going to cheat a little bit. This one actually comes out of the Bands of Mourning. Don't crucify me, I'm sorry, but I really liked it. So number 5 is the return of the Koloss as sentient beings.
Okay.
Right? And so in this trilogy, the Koloss are very, very brutal, very, animalistic creatures.
I think we only hear one talk, right?
Right. And they have a society.
Yeah. They have rules and all that.
Right, exactly. And you can kind of sense this like nascent desire for them to be human, right? Even like the one guy, it's named Human. Right, exactly.
Human.
And so like at the end of the next series, they become sentient beings, right? They have societies. They wear clothes, right? We have Koloss-blooded people, right?
Yeah,
so
that's always interesting to me.
It's very interesting. And we'll talk more about that maybe in the future. But
Yeah.
I felt like that was kind of a cool, iconic moment.
Okay.
Next one, Sazed becomes Harmony, right?
Yeah.
That sets up the whole next era, right?
And beyond.
And beyond, right? And introduces an interesting concept in that can anything actually get done when you have 2 opposite forces pulling you in each direction?
Yeah.
Right? Harmony, we kind of associate that with, this is a good thing.
Yeah.
We've achieved balance.
Yeah.
Right? But like if you've achieved balance, then how do you accomplish anything?
If you have, I need to do this thing, and the other side's like, no, you don't, and then you're just stuck in this back and forth the whole time.
Right.
Yeah.
And so,
and we saw a little bit of that in the next era, where Sazed is very indecisive.
It's true.
As a result.
That's true. And so I think that's a pretty iconic moment. Sets us up for the next series.
Yeah.
Very important.
Yeah, good one.
Number 3, the collapse of the final empire. Right? As we know, Lord Ruler Rashik has been, for almost 1,000 years, getting ready to grab the power again to, fix his mistakes, try to fix his mistakes, and keep ruin at bay, right? And when the final empire falls, and he says, "You guys have no idea what you've done," right? Kicks off this chain of events that basically, ends the world.
Yeah.
And so, when the Lord Ruler dies and the empire falls, I think that's.
Because usually that's the goal, that happens. That happened in the first book, and like, oh, sweet, I guess it's over. No more story.
Exactly.
That's the beginning of the story.
That's the beginning of the story. And the big, oh, you guys screwed up thing is kind of the big, the hint there.
Yeah.
Number 2, I think, is Kelsier's sacrifice.
Yeah.
Right? Because like you pointed out, Vin, Ellen, Sazed don't become who they are if Kelsier doesn't die. Right? I think he knew he had to die. I don't think he wanted to, but he knew he had to die in order for, one, the Ska to rise up, two, to allow Sazed, Vin, and Ellen to become who they are. I don't think he was thinking of them directly, but
I think about Vin he was.
for Vin, probably, yeah.
But the other two definitely not.
But that really sets it, and then, some of the things that he does on the other side, right, directly play into how this all, plays out. And so, Kelsier doesn't die, none of this happens.
Yeah, it'd be a completely different story. One I'd be interested to hear hypotheses on.
Yeah, that would be, if Kelsier lives, I don't know.
Yeah.
We should do a whole podcast episode about that.
Yeah, the what ifs.
What if Kelsier didn't die?
We could do a what if Mistborn version like they did with Marvel.
Yes.
On Disney Channel.
That's true. That's true. That would be good.
Yeah.
Then the last one is number one, when Vin ascends to be preservation.
Okay.
Right?
Yeah.
I feel like that is, so with Vin kind of being the main character through all this, you kind of see her develop from a mousy nobody in a gutter to a literal god.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And by the time she becomes a god, is right when she's kind of figured out how she feels about Elend, right?
Yeah.
And how it all works out. And then that's ripped away from her. And so she then becomes, basically says, all right, well, that's it. I'm done. And takes out Ruin and sets up. And the reason I think that's number one is it really sets up the whole next stage. And had she not become the god, Ruin doesn't die, right? And then Harmony doesn't become Harmony because, Sazed needs to be able to be both, exactly.
Hold both shards. Well, what if Vin what if she was survived as preservation? Would that be acceptable?
I don't know. I don't think so. Like, I feel like then it becomes, well, that's actually a really good question, because the previous preservation put part of himself into Scadrial, right? And so now that Vin is preservation, does that choice impact her? Or does she inherit all of the shard? Because if she inherits all of the shard, then maybe not. Maybe then it's fine.
Yeah.
And they can just exist as opposites forever.
Yeah.
And then maybe we don't face the same inaction like we see with Sazed in the next series.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. Another what if.
It's another what if. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm just trying to find ways to have Vin survive.
No, exactly. Vin needs to live.
Yeah.
She needs to come back through one of those portals.
Yeah. Yeah. On your left.
On your left, we have Vin from Scadrial, checking in at 4 foot nothing.
Yeah.
And will royally destroy you.
Yeah. She'll kill you. Yeah, it's a good list. I like it. Definitely, those are iconic moments throughout the story. And it kind of relates to my hot take, your number one, which I had thought of before before I knew what your top 5 was. But my hot take is Vin sucks in this book. In the sense that the whole time, last book, she's like, oh, I don't know what to do. Do I love Ellen? Do I love, what's his name? The other guy, his brother that looks just like him, but he's bad. He's a bad boy.
Yeah.
So we got that the whole book.
A lot of teenage drama.
And then she finally makes the decision. She loves Ellen. And then this book, we got Ellen and Vin, but she's like pouty and like, I don't know if I'm good enough, or, there's no, and like you said there in the top list, number one, is she finally gets it at the very end, right? So that's what I'm referring to, is like the whole book, they're finally together, and the whole book she's like discounting it.
Yeah. Until
the end. And it's like, I thought we got through this. I thought you made your decision. What's the problem now? And so I think I think out of all the story, all the book, that's what bothered me.
Yeah.
Because that's a through line through the whole story till the end. And I was like, come on.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah.
We got to go through this again?
I totally agree, honestly. And I'm gonna capitalize on your hot take and
Okay.
say it's a very similar thing to like the Wheel of Time. Like I think Rand sucks
Oh yeah, with that aspect, yeah,
with the same aspect,
yeah.
right?
Do I choose Egwene? I love Egwene.
No.
Oh no, I love Elaine.
I'm so pouty,
Yeah,
like this emo guy, and then finally I find like Nirvana in the end, and then I'm okay, and then I'm more or less gone,
yeah,
right?
yeah. And then he feels guilty for loving Elaine over Egwene,
Right.
And Min's always there, and
Right.
the other one, the Aiel chick. Yeah, same thing. It's like, oh, I get there's got to be some contention or some drama.
And there's got to be a character arc, but
Yeah.
less of the whine.
Yeah.
We need less of the whining.
Yeah. And yeah. So that really bothered me in the sense that I had to read it sit there and reread that thing the whole time. But
how could he have done it differently?
yeah, I was thinking that as
Like,
I was
how could it
complaining
be
about
different?
it. Well, I think you have them. She admits more that she loves him. She's glad she's with him. She wants to work with him. And he kind of had a little bit of that too.
Right.
So they're the most powerful people in the planet.
Right.
At that, besides ATM or Ruin and Preservation.
Right.
So why are they not working together when the world is at risk?
Yeah.
So I would want to see that. Like, let's come together and give it a go. Like, there was the whole thing on the Fadrix. They should have just gone in and killed the guy or captured him at least and taken over the city.
Yeah.
But they were so indecisive. Oh, we don't want to do that. We don't want to show power. It's like, yeah, if it's just a normal day in the Empire, okay, try diplomacy. But it's the end of the world.
It's the end of the world. Right.
You got to do something now.
Yeah.
And so why can't they work together, not only in that situation, but in all these other ones? And I think you see that in the beginning a little bit when they attack that first city and find the cache. But so I guess work together, do miracles, save the world together, or at least try to until Ruin comes in at the end.
Right. Now that would make sense. I think it'd be cool if they would have sorted out their issues earlier on in book 3.
Yeah.
And then to your point, been like, super power couple.
Yeah. Or
And,
like Wonder
kick
Woman,
some serious
Superman.
butt. Yeah. No, exactly.
Yeah.
Oh, that would have been cool.
Yeah. At least for a month, have them get along and love each other.
Right.
Instead of the last minute. But anyway, so that's my hot take. What do you guys think? Is that am I being too nitpicky? Am I being unrelatable because I'm an old guy, old boomer, and I don't understand these young women and their dramas? Let us know. And if you're a younger person and you've read this trilogy, whether you're male or female, what did you think about that love story? Did it work for you, or was it too teenage drama? And I don't know. I think it bothered me as well because she went through that the whole previous book, right? That was the dilemma of the previous books. Okay, yeah, you did it. Do we got to do it again? So.
Oh yeah.
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 So did that work for you guys, you listeners out there? Let us know in the comments. Any final thoughts, Kyle?
Not good series. Just Brandon Sanderson really has a way of world building and making you invest in the characters. Mm-hmm. And so, I'll be honest, I like the next series of books better.
Yeah.
But he just builds off of a good thing.
Yeah.
And so highly recommend this trilogy. Really interesting read. Sets up a really good world I guess world to be part of the Cosmere.
Yeah.
And is, I think, going to play a major role when you start having these more of the cross-Cosmere collaborations.
Right. I agree 100%. I feel like you have to read this trilogy to understand the allomancy, hemalurgy, and ferochemy, because the book's very good at describing each power, what each one does, almost to a fault, where it's too technical, too logical. And so, but you need to know it, because in the next book, it all starts to come together, and it's going to keep doing that. It's going to start merging with other magic systems and these other systems that already started in the Lost Metal. So you got to read it, get that foundation, and then build from there.
Yeah.
So it's vital, important reading. So anyway, yeah, thanks for watching, guys. Thanks for listening. Subscribe to the channel. Like us. Doesn't cost you anything. It helps us out a lot. So thanks, guys, for joining us, because there's always another secret.
Take care, everybody. We'll see you.